He was old, tired, and forgotten. Just a golden retriever waiting to die quietly in the corner of a veterinary clinic until he lifted his head, looked toward the door, and let out a sound that stopped time. He wasn't calling for help. He was calling for his person. What happened next defied science, shattered hearts, and reminded the world of one simple truth. Some bonds don't end with goodbye, they begin there. Stay with us. This is a story you'll carry with you forever. The town of Serene, Oregon, nestled between evergreen mountains and the wide mirror of Lake Serene, was the sort of place where time moved slow and people still waved at passing cars. The late summer air carried the faint scent of pine and lake water, and the sun had just begun its descent, casting a golden shimmer across the rippling waters. In the distance, a chorus of cicadas buzzed softly as if humming lullabies for the trees. It was the kind of evening that made the world feel whole, except for the man standing quietly on the back porch of a weathered cabin, staring out toward the water like he was waiting for something to end. Tom Harris was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 60s with a frame that had once borne the weight of fallen beams and burning walls. His face was lined from years of heat, smoke, and grief with a salt-and-pepper beard that had lost its fire long ago. His eyes, a dull storm gray, had once been sharp and quick, but now held a quiet heaviness that never quite lifted. He wore a faded blue flannel sleeves rolled to the elbow, exposing calloused arms marked by old scars and the trembling hush of age. Tom had spent 3 decades as a firefighter, much of it battling wildfires across the Pacific Northwest. But the last 5 years had been spent in this lakeside cabin, retired from heroics, if not from memory. Beside him, lying with regal ease on a worn wool blanket, was Buddy, a 12-year-old golden retriever with a thick coat of pale honey gold fur that shimmered softly in the dying light. Though his muzzle was turning white and his gait had slowed, Buddy still held the poised dignity of a working dog. His eyes, a deep amber brown, followed Tom's every move, not with the sharp vigilance of a soldier, but the quiet devotion of a soul, already fused to another. Buddy had once served beside Tom in the fire service, trained to sniff out survivors, to navigate smoke-filled corridors, to comfort the living and honor the lost. Now he was mostly companion, shadow heartbeat. Tom bent slowly, joints creaking, and scratched Buddy behind the ear. "Another good day, huh, pal?" he said softly. Buddy responded with a low thump of his tail against the porch. Tom watched the lake a moment longer, then turned toward the door. Inside the cabin was a blend of past lives and simple comforts. Framed photos of fire crews, faded commendations, and the occasional childish drawing gifts from grateful families lined the walls. On the mantel sat a small wooden box engraved with names Tom hadn't spoken aloud in years. He moved to the kitchen, started a kettle, and placed 2 mugs on the table out of habit. The second one was for Buddy. He never drank tea, of course, but Tom liked the ritual. A moment later, he reached for the bottle of heart pills on the shelf above the sink. His hand hovered there. Then he closed the cabinet without taking any. He hadn't told anyone. Not his brother in Portland. Not the firehouse crew who still sent him Christmas cards. Not even Emily, his late sister's daughter, who called every other week asking if he was still eating like a human. The diagnosis had come quietly. Congestive heart failure, likely years in the making. He was given options, plans, lifestyle changes. He declined most of them. He had Buddy and the lake and a few more sunsets to catch. Later, as the sky deepened from amber to indigo, Tom and Buddy walked slowly along the shore path behind the cabin. Buddy's limp was more noticeable on colder days, and tonight the breeze carried the chill of early fall. Tom didn't mind the slowness. He walked with one hand in his coat pocket, the other brushing against Buddy's back. About halfway down the path, they passed Martha Green's old dock. Martha was in her 80s, now widowed 10 years, with thick glasses, sharp opinions, and a laugh that scared geese. She'd been the town librarian for 4 decades and still baked pies like it was the Great Depression. As always, she waved a wooden spoon at them from her porch. "Evenin', Tom, dog's still walkin' you." "I see." Tom gave a lopsided smile. "Every damn day." She chuckled and turned back inside. Buddy sniffed a patch of grass that smelled vaguely like blackberry pie. Back at the cabin, Tom lit a fire in the stove and settled into his recliner, Buddy curling up at his feet. The room flickered with firelight shadows dancing gently on the log walls. Tom reached for a dog-eared book, but didn't open it. Instead, he stared into the flames. His chest felt heavy, not just physically, but in that way memories press when you haven't spoken them aloud in a while. He looked down at Buddy. "You remember Yellowstone? That one hiker we pulled out of the ravine." Buddy raised his head slightly, ears flicking. "Hell of a mess, but you found her. You always found 'em." He paused, running his hand through the thick fur. "Guess one day you won't be here to find me." Buddy nudged his hand as if in protest. Tom smiled faintly, then winced. A sharp pressure bloomed in his chest like a too-tight belt drawn from inside. He closed his eyes and waited until it passed. It always passed, but it was lasting longer now. He didn't cry. Tom Harris hadn't cried in 30 years. Not when he buried friends, not when he gave his last salute to the badge, not even when the doctor laid the truth out on sterile paper. But that night as the fire burned low and Buddy rested his head on Tom's boot, something inside him cracked quietly. Not from fear, from love, too large to hold. Outside, the stars were beginning to scatter across the lake's surface like spilled sugar. The world was so still you could hear the wind weave through the trees, and somewhere in the distance a loon called once, before a silence reclaimed the dusk. In that soft golden hour between breath and stillness, between memory and forgetting, Tom Harris made a silent promise to the dog at his feet. If the end was near, it would not be alone. It would not be quiet. And it would not be wasted. The following morning broke cold and gray, with the lake wrapped in a light mist that clung to the water like breath on glass. The warmth of yesterday's sunset had retreated, replaced by a lingering chill that whispered of the autumn coming just around the bend. Tom sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee and listening to the slow, even breathing of Buddy curled beneath his feet. The silence was a comfort, one he'd grown used to in the last few years. But today, the stillness was about to be broken. The hum of tires on gravel outside made Buddy perk up. His ears twitched, and he lifted his head, his eyes alert. Tom frowned and stood coffee in hand, stepping onto the front porch just as an old sedan rolled up the winding driveway. The car was dusty, the front bumper slightly dented, and from the driver's seat emerged a young woman with a familiar set to her shoulders, like she was always bracing against something. Emily Morgan was 26, slim and slightly angular, with long auburn hair tied messily into a bun that had clearly lost the battle with a long drive. Her eyes were a sharp, piercing green, the kind that once sparkled with mischief, but now held the weary dullness of grief. She wore a dark hoodie, frayed jeans, and sneakers with mismatched laces, one pink, one gray. There was a hardness in her movements, the sort that didn't come from rebellion but from heartbreak. Tom didn't move from the porch. He hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years, not since her mother, his sister Caroline, had passed. A drunk driver, a rainy highway, a call in the middle of the night. Tom hadn't known what to say. Then he still didn't. Now, Emily slammed the car door shut, slinging a worn backpack over her shoulder. "Hey, Uncle Tom." Tom nodded. "Emily." There was a pause. Buddy stepped forward, tail wagging, slowly sniffing the air. Emily's brows furrowed. "Is that Buddy?" "Same as ever," Tom said, patting the old retriever's head. "Slower now. Aren't we all?" Emily didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to the porch swing, the woodpile, the familiar outline of the lake beyond the trees. She had spent summers here as a child, learning to swim, chasing fireflies, roasting marshmallows. That was before her father left, before her mother started falling apart, before she had to grow up too fast. "I figured I'd stay a while," she said at last, eyes down. "Maybe help out." Tom didn't argue. He didn't need help. Not really, but he knew better than to turn away someone who didn't want to be alone. Inside, Emily dropped her bag beside the old sofa and glanced around. Everything looked the same. Time here moved like molasses, slow and sweet and stuck in place. On the mantel, the photo of her mom still smiled faintly from behind the glass. Buddy followed her movements with quiet curiosity, his tail wagging, once then stopping when she didn't look his way. She noticed, "I'm not really a dog person," she muttered. "No offense." Buddy simply blinked at her, then padded back to his blanket. Over the next few days, Emily settled into a rhythm. She cleaned the kitchen, organized the pantry, added fresh batteries to the smoke alarms. She avoided long conversations, but she listened to Tom's stories when he chose to speak. He rarely did. When he coughed too hard or paused too long between breaths, she pretended not to notice. Each morning, she'd find Buddy waiting by the door, leash in his mouth, eyes hopeful. Tom's heart wasn't up for long walks anymore, and Emily reluctantly agreed to take the leash. Their first walks were awkward, marked by short tugs and soft curses. Emily didn't know how to handle. Silence, she tried small talk. Buddy didn't answer, but he listened. It was during one of these walks that they met Leo, an elderly man with skin like aged leather and a slow, lopsided gait. He was fishing by the dock in faded overalls, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his sunburnt face. His hands were rough, his fingers curled like claws from arthritis. "Morning," he said, reeling in a line with no catch. "Ain't you? Caroline's girl." Emily nodded. Leo gave a slow, understanding grunt. "She used to read by that big willow yonder. Talked more to squirrels than folks." Emily almost smiled. "Sounds about right." Buddy wagged his tail at Leo, who gave him a slow nod. "Good dog, that one. Helped me find my grandson once, back when he ran off into the woods during that fire." Emily blinked. "You mean the wildfire?" 7 years ago." Leo nodded. "That dog's got more sense than half the town." He looked at her then, real and direct. "You take care of him. He knows things, feels things." She didn't know what to say to that, so she nodded and kept walking. That night, as Tom dozed in the recliner, Emily sat on the porch steps with Buddy curled beside her. She reached out cautiously, brushing his thick fur. It was softer than she expected, warm and steady, like a heartbeat made of sunshine. "I don't hate dogs," she whispered. "I just didn't want to love something that'd leave." Buddy leaned against her, heavy and quiet, as if to say nothing was promised but this moment. Tom watched from the window, unseen. He felt the tightness in his chest, not from illness this time, but from the strange, aching hope that maybe, just maybe, the walls they'd all built around themselves were beginning to crack. The lake shimmered in the moonlight. The air was cool but not unkind, and somewhere beneath the surface of silence healing had begun. The wind had changed. It swept in from the far end of Lake Serene, stirring the reeds and ruffling the water like fingers combing through old memories. The trees whispered louder now, as if they sensed a silence approaching one too deep for words. Tom Harris sat alone on the front porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the lake with the quiet stillness of a man who had learned long ago that the world doesn't owe you an explanation. Beside him, Buddy slept, or rather, he tried to. His breathing was no longer the slow, peaceful rhythm of rest. It was a quiet struggle, inhale, pause, exhale, rasp. The rise and fall of his golden chest came like waves that didn't know if they should keep coming or finally rest on the shore. Tom didn't move. He didn't speak. He only watched his eyes tracing the distant shimmer of morning sun across the water. The soft fog curling at the lake's edge, the way Buddy's ears twitched, as if still alert to some distant call. It had started a few weeks earlier. Subtle, at first, Buddy had slowed down on their walks, stopped halfway down the path to the dock tail, wagging less. His appetite fading. Tom knew it wasn't just age. He'd seen too many things in life to pretend otherwise. There was no vet visit, no scans, no cold diagnosis delivered under fluorescent light. Tom didn't need it spelled out. He'd seen the signs in burning buildings and fallen comrades. He knew the sound of something fading, and now it echoed in the body of the only soul left who knew his whole story. He had once run into collapsing homes to pull strangers from smoke and rubble. But now he sat powerless as the one creature who had always followed him into fire, into dark, into silence began to drift away. Tom stood joint stiff and walked slowly back inside. The kettle had whistled itself silent 10 minutes ago, and the fire in the stove had burned down to glowing coals. He poured water into Buddy's bowl, even though he knew it would likely go untouched. Returning to the porch, he crouched beside the old retriever and brushed a hand through his thick golden fur. "Still with me, boy." Buddy opened one eye, blinked, and let out a soft huff that wasn't quite a sigh, but carried the weight of one. Tom chuckled under his breath. "You always were too stubborn to quit early." The day passed like most had in recent weeks. Slow, quiet, reverent. Tom read from the same paperback novel he'd never finished the pages, curling at the corners from time and steam. He sat near Buddy, sometimes talking to him like they were in the cab of a fire truck again, sometimes just listening to the wind. He cooked oatmeal and overcooked eggs. Buddy watched but didn't beg. The hunger had gone. At dusk, Tom built a small fire in the backyard pit. The nights were colder now, and it gave them both something warm to lean toward. He dragged Buddy's blanket out next to the fire pit and gently helped the dog onto it, tucking him in like a child. The stars came out slowly, scattering across the indigo sky. He didn't say much. Instead, he remembered. He remembered the time Buddy had pulled a girl from the back of a collapsed barn in Montana, barking, until they heard him through the dust. He remembered the summer storms in Idaho, the long drives between towns, the silence they both shared when no one else could understand what it meant to keep surviving. Now, as the fire crackled low, Tom felt a heaviness he couldn't name. He looked at Buddy, his best friend, his shadow, his constant. The dog looked back weak but aware, tired but present. And then Tom said it. "I don't know who I'll be when you're gone." The words cracked in his throat, brittle like pine bark. Buddy blinked slowly and Tom swore he understood. He always had. The moon had climbed halfway across the sky when Tom dozed off in the rocking chair. A blanket pulled up over his knees, his hand still resting on Buddy's side. In sleep, his fingers never loosened their grip, and Buddy stayed, breathing gently, present together. They had chosen not to count the days left, but to hold each one like a fragile gift, like breath caught in cupped hands. When the morning came, neither had moved much, but they had made it one more day. Rain rolled in from the mountains that morning, soft at first, then steady, turning the gravel road into a dark ribbon and the lake into a rippling gray sheet. The sky hung low over Serene, the way it often did when the season began to shift. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of damp wood and old coffee, and Tom moved like a shadow from window to stove, from stove to Buddy, who had curled beside the fire like a tired lion, guarding a quiet kingdom. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, elbows resting on the counter, watching raindrops race down the window pane. She had been there a while, holding a chipped mug that had long gone cold, trying to piece together the version of her uncle. She never knew the man before. Age and silence had worn him down. She turned, finally, breaking the hush. "You never talk about the fires." Tom glanced up from Buddy, his brow creasing. "What about 'em? All those photos? All those plaques on the wall?" She nodded toward the hallway lined with framed commendations. "It's like someone else lived that life, not you." Tom didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt beside Buddy, brushing a hand through the golden retriever's thick fur. The dog was thinner now, his breathing shallow but steady. He leaned into Tom's touch like it was the only thing tethering him to the world. Emily stepped forward slowly, her voice lower. This time, "I found that article, the one about Yellowstone. You and Buddy saved 6 people, a whole family." Tom's hand paused on Buddy's back. 7, he said quietly. "The last one was under a collapsed stairwell. Buddy found her. I would have walked right past." Emily sat down across from him, hands folded. "Why'd you stop? Why this place?" He looked at her, and for a moment she saw it. The flicker of everything he never said. The weight of people he couldn't save. The nights, the screams didn't stop, even after the flames were gone, because eventually he murmured, "You either get out or the fire gets you." Emily didn't press. She watched as Buddy shifted slightly, resting his head on Tom's boot. "I wish I'd known him before he got sick," she said after a while. Back when he still ran, Tom gave a quiet, almost bitter smile. He ran circles around rookies, climbed ladders like he was born with 4 opposable thumbs. Stubborn as hell, wouldn't leave a site until every scent was cleared. There was pride in his voice, but also ache. Emily looked at Buddy, then back to Tom. "I want to help." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You already are." "No, I mean, really, help. His breathing, his joints. I've been reading about supplements, gentle therapy, stretches for dogs, natural remedies." She hesitated. "And there's a vet in town who does home visits, Dr. Kinney. She treated my friend's husky when he had heartworms. She's good." Tom was silent for a long time. "He's not a project," he said finally. "I know." Emily replied, "He's family." The rain thickened, drumming harder against the roof. Tom stared into the fire for a long while, then nodded, once fine. "But no weird oils or chakra crystals." Emily gave a small laugh. "Deal?" That afternoon they worked together in quiet purpose. Emily cleared a space in the living room, laying down an old yoga mat and towels to make a soft resting spot. She brewed herbal tea, not just for herself, but also for Buddy, mixing a vet-approved blend with bone broth. Tom brought in fresh firewood and adjusted the heat in the room. It was the first time in weeks he hadn't moved with dread dragging behind each step. Later, they sat beside Buddy, who now lay more comfortably, his head lifted just enough to rest on Tom's knee. Emily gently massaged his back legs, murmuring softly, unsure if he could hear or understand. But Buddy didn't flinch. He trusted her now, not with his strength, but with his stillness. That night, Tom found himself watching Emily instead of the fire. She moved with care, spoke with tenderness. He saw his sister in her, the same stubborn gentleness, the same way she lit up when something fragile leaned toward her. "You're good with him," he said suddenly. Emily looked up surprised. "I'm trying." Tom nodded. "You remind me of her?" "Caroline." Emily smiled, but her eyes turned glassy. "I miss her every day." Tom didn't respond, but his hand reached across the blanket to rest briefly on hers, just enough to let her know the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, 3 souls sat close to the fire, one fading, one healing, and one learning to carry both, without letting either fall. And for the first time in a long while, none of them felt alone. The summer storm came fast and loud, galloping in from the west, with wind that bent the pine trees like blades of grass and thunder that cracked open the sky like a bone. Rain lashed the earth with a kind of fury that didn't belong to July. It filled the gutters, swelled the creek that fed into Lake Serene, and soaked the little town in less than an hour. By dusk, the water had risen past its usual muddy boundaries, creeping like a secret beneath porches, over gravel roads, and through fields that hadn't seen flood since the 90s. Tom Harris stood on his porch, one hand gripping the railing, the other shielding his eyes from the rain as he watched the road disappear into rising water. His jaw was tight. He'd seen storms before many, but this one had the same teeth, the same eerie momentum that usually meant someone was about to lose something they couldn't replace. Inside, Buddy lay by the fire, his breath shallow but even. The storm rattled the windows, but he didn't flinch. He was too old to waste energy on things he couldn't chase. And yet, when Tom opened the door again, something in the dog's eyes changed. Tom didn't see it right away. He was too busy listening to the sound of tires spinning out somewhere down the hill. Then came the shouting, muffled, frantic. A child's voice. Panic. Tom turned back toward Buddy, who was already standing. Shaky, slow, but upright. It was the first time in days. "Stay here," Tom said, automatically reaching for his coat. But Buddy didn't sit. He took a step forward. Then another. His body moved like an old machine that still remembered how to run. Tom frowned. "You're not serious." But Buddy was already at the door. The shouting came again, closer this time. Tom didn't think. He grabbed his flashlight and trudged into the storm. Buddy, limping beside him like a sentinel, called back into duty. The sound led them to the old cabin near the edge of the lake, the Peters summer place boarded for most of the year. Its lower level had flooded. Water pushed against the windows, and through the fogged glass, Tom could see movement. A small hand, then a face. Inside was a boy, maybe 6 or 7, soaked and shivering, trapped behind the warped front door. His name was Mason, short for Mason. Peters, red-haired, freckled, thin-limbed, and terrified. Tom tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Swollen wood. Water pressure. The boy was crying now, his palms pressed flat against the window. Tom stepped back, calculating. No phone, no backup, no time. He looked at Buddy. The old retriever was already wading toward the back of the house. Buddy? No, but the dog didn't stop. He moved through the rising water like he'd never forgotten how. He circled to the rear where Tom knew there was a crawl space. Years ago, they'd used it to pull a raccoon out of the ventilation duct. Now it was the only shot. Tom followed, heart pounding. He reached the back just as Buddy disappeared under the porch. The access door was ajar. Tom dropped to his knees, flashlight aimed. He couldn't see anything. Then a bark, muffled. Urgent. Inside the cabin, Mason was no longer pressed to the window. He was looking down toward the floor vent. Another bark. Buddy had found him. Tom scrambled to the side window and smashed it with a rock. Glass shattered and water spilled over the sill, but he reached in and undid the latch. The window groaned open. "Mason," he shouted, "come here." The boy was trembling, confused, but Buddy was there, pushing him gently with his head, guiding him toward the open path. Within seconds, Tom had the boy in his arms, soaked to the bone, crying. But safe, Buddy followed. Slow coughing. His legs gave out just as Tom set Mason down. The dog collapsed into the grass, breathing hard, eyes blinking against the rain. Tom dropped beside him. "You stupid, beautiful dog," he whispered. Lights came, then headlights, then flashlights, neighbors, emergency volunteers. Someone had called in the flooding. They took Mason, wrapped him in blankets. He clung to Tom's hand until the very last moment. Buddy was loaded into a truck bed lined with towels. Tom sat beside him, refusing to go anywhere else. By morning, the storm had passed. The lake began to recede slow and reluctant, and news had already begun to spread. The town paper ran the story first: Golden hero saves boy from summer flood, then the local news, then regional outlets, photos of Buddy lying on a blanket oxygen mask gently pressed to his muzzle eyes. Half closed but alive, they called him a miracle. Tom didn't say much. He never liked attention. But when Mason's mother came to the cabin 3 days later, holding her son's hand and crying as she thanked them both, Tom couldn't help but reach down and rest his hand on Buddy's back. "He's always known who needs saving," he said, "even now." It began with a whisper. Not a sound exactly, but a presence, a shift in the atmosphere. The morning after the flood, Tom didn't come down for coffee. Emily found the pot cold, the mug untouched. She called his name. No answer. When she finally climbed the stairs, a heart thudding against her ribs, she found him sitting on the edge of his bed, one hand gripping his chest, face pale and slick with sweat. "I'm fine," he rasped. But he wasn't. Emily helped him down the stairs, refusing to let him wave her off. His breath came shallow, wheezing through clenched teeth. By the time she reached the car, she was yelling for help. Their neighbor, Mr. Dennings, a wiry man in his 70s with a limp and a permanent squint, heard the noise and rushed over. Hospital Emily said through gritted teeth, "Get him in the back." Dennings grunted, unlocking his truck. "I'll drive." Buddy, who had been curled near the porch since dawn, stood as they carried Tom out. His ears perked, then lowered. He sniffed the air, then let out a low, guttural sound, half growl, half whimper. Tom tried to lift a hand toward him, but couldn't. "Stay, boy," he managed. "Stay." The truck pulled away, spraying gravel behind it, and Buddy ran after it for several paces before stopping abruptly. He sat down on the road, ears forward, eyes locked on the fading vehicle. Then he lay down and didn't move. At Serene General Hospital, a modest 3-story building tucked at the edge of town, Tom was admitted for cardiac monitoring. A nurse named Joy, round-faced with kind eyes and a soft Appalachian accent, helped him into a gown and ran his vitals. She reminded Emily of someone's favorite aunt, warm but commanding. "He's stable, but his heart's been working too hard for too long," she told Emily outside the room. "He's going to need rest meds and a whole lot of stubbornness to make it out of this." Emily nodded, barely hearing her. Her eyes were drawn to the window, where clouds loomed low again, as if nature itself held its breath. She returned to Tom's room. He was awake, but barely. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. Emily brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Don't be an idiot." He tried to chuckle, but it came out as a cough. His eyes drifted toward the window. "Buddy?" Emily hesitated. "He's home," she said. "With Mr. Dennings. I'll check on him soon." Tom's jaw tightened. "He's not good at being alone." "Neither am I," Emily almost said. But she didn't. Back at the cabin, Buddy hadn't moved. Mr. Dennings had left a bowl of water and some kibble, but Buddy ignored both. He lay by the gate like a statue carved from grief. His nose pointed toward the horizon. Emily found him there hours later, muddy, silent, unmoving. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "He's okay. He's fighting." Buddy looked up. His eyes were dull, rimmed red. He let out a sound that made Emily's chest tighten, a low, broken whimper, like something inside him had come undone. That night he refused to eat, refused to come inside, just curled up on the porch tail, limp body heavy with sorrow. Emily didn't sleep. She paced, thought. Cried once quietly in the kitchen. By sunrise she had made her choice. She called Joy at the hospital, explained everything. There was silence, then a sigh. "I'm not supposed to say yes," Joy said, "but bring him to the loading dock out back. I'll figure it out." Emily looked down at Buddy, who was staring at the door. He stood as she approached with the leash, though she didn't need it. He followed her to the truck, climbed in without protest. He knew the drive was silent except for the occasional wet sniff from the dog beside her. At the hospital's rear entrance, Joy was waiting in scrubs and sneakers, a thick brown blanket in her arms. "Quickly now," she said, helping Emily lift Buddy from the truck. Inside, the staff didn't stop them. Some smiled. One older janitor even tipped his cap. Upstairs, Tom lay asleep, a monitor beeping beside him. Emily opened the door. Slowly. "Let me?" Joy said gently, kneeling beside Buddy. Together, they lifted him onto the edge of Tom's bed. The moment his paws touched the blanket, Tom stirred. His eyes fluttered open, saw gold, saw fur. Then a wet nose pressing into his palm. "Buddy," he whispered, voice trembling. The dog let out a soft huff, then rested his head on Tom's chest. Careful, protective. Tom's hand moved to the dog's back fingers, twitching weakly. "Hey, boy." And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, his heart monitor steadied. They stayed like that for hours. Emily sat in the chair nearby, watching as the storm outside softened into a slow, steady drizzle. At some point, Joy came in with tea and a biscuit shaped like a bone. "For the real patient," she said, smiling at Buddy. That night, the nurses adjusted Tom's IV and monitored his blood pressure. Emily stayed by the window. She didn't check her phone, didn't text anyone, because at that moment everything she needed was in that room, a man, a dog, and the space between them that wasn't silence anymore but survival. The morning after Buddy was smuggled into Serene General, the hospital felt different, less like a place that waited for endings and more like one that remembered beginnings. The rain had passed in the night, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and full of promise. Sunlight spilled through the window of room 203, turning the edges of the bed white and golden like a photograph halfway to heaven. Tom Harris lay propped up against a bank of pillows, his eyes still closed, but his hand resting firmly on Buddy's neck. The dog hadn't moved from his spot on the bed. His breathing was slow, and even rising and falling in tandem with Tom's machines, beeped steadily. Not in warning, but in rhythm, as if their pulses had synced. Emily sat in the chair by the window, legs curled beneath her, a paperback book in her lap. She hadn't read a single page of. Her eyes flicked constantly between the monitor and the old man in the bed. Every rise in the heart rate, every stable drop in blood pressure, it all matched one thing: Buddy's presence. It wasn't just coincidence. The nurses had begun to notice. The attending physician, Dr. Will Conway, a tall, lean man in his early 50s with a salt and pepper beard and a crisp, analytical mind, finally admitted it himself. "It's a physiological anomaly," he said that morning, eyes locked on the monitor, arms crossed. "But you could also call it a biological miracle. A living tether, if you will." Emily arched an eyebrow. "That sounds like a very scientific way of saying he's keeping my uncle alive." Dr. Conway didn't smile. He wasn't the smiling type, but his gaze softened slightly. "I've seen cases where emotional bonds influence cardiac stability. Therapy, animals, memory, recall, sensory stimulation. But this is rare." He looked down at Buddy. The dog blinked up at him, expression unreadable but wise, as if he too knew he was being studied. "We won't separate them again," Conway added, "not unless we want the opposite effect." It was then that Emily decided to call them Tom's old crew. She had heard stories of them in fragments between cups of coffee and war stories murmured over dinner. She found a number on a weathered contact sheet in Tom's office drawer, under a faded sticky note labeled, "Only if it matters." It mattered. She called Firehouse 21 in Portland. The man who answered was Chief Brendan Marks, a tall, broad-chested African-American man with a voice like gravel soaked in honey. He had served with Tom for 2 decades, and Emily could hear the weight settle into his silence when she told him the news. "We'll come," he said. "Tell him to wait for us." By noon the next day, 3 trucks pulled up in front of Serene General Hospital. Not fire trucks, but personal vehicles, beat-up Fords, an old red Jeep, and a van with a crooked ladder strapped to the roof. Out stepped 4 men and 1 woman, all in their late 50s to early 70s, some still wearing faded department jackets with worn patches. Brendan was the first through the door. He had kind eyes, a shaved head, and walked with a slight limp from an old back injury. With him was Luis Ramos, short and square, with a deep laugh and a mechanical pencil tucked behind his ear. Paul Beans McKinley, all limbs and stubble. Gordon Pike, quiet and pale with burn scars on one arm. And finally, Teresa Ward, slender, sharp-eyed, and always carrying a thermos of black coffee she refused to share. Emily met them at the lobby and led them upstairs. In the doorway of room 203 they paused. Tom was awake now, but barely. His face was thin skin, pulled tight over his cheekbones, but his eyes lit up when he saw them. About damn time, he croaked. Brendan grinned. You try getting through Portland traffic on a weekday. Buddy raised his head at the sound of familiar voices, tail tapping weakly against the mattress. Each crew member stepped forward one at a time, placing their hands on Tom's shoulder, his arm, his blanket. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Firehouse bonds were forged in flame and silence. Teresa stepped closer, pulled a photo from her coat pocket. It showed all of them standing in front of a collapsed building, soot-streaked and tired. Buddy, in the center eyes, bright harness proudly strapped. "We brought you this," she said, "in case you forgot who the hell you are." Tom's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. "I didn't forget," he said. "I just stopped saying it out loud." They stayed for hours. Some took turns sitting beside the bed. Luis told bad jokes. Brendan recounted the time Tom once carried a 200-pound unconscious man down 4 flights of stairs with a busted shoulder. Paul fell asleep in the corner chair, snoring loudly, and no one minded. At one point, the beeping on the monitor stuttered slightly, then rebalanced. Conway returned, scanned the numbers, and turned to Emily. "I don't know what you call this," he said, "but it's working." Emily glanced at Buddy, who had again pressed his head into the crook of Tom's arm. "I call it love," she said. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the room in golden light, Tom turned his head to Emily. "You didn't have to bring them," he said. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized had come. "Yes, I did." He looked down at Buddy. "You didn't have to stay either." But Buddy didn't answer. He didn't need to. His presence was answer enough. The first day of autumn in Serene arrived like a soft exhale. The lake was calm, its surface scattered with gold and amber leaves drifting slowly toward the shore. The air smelled of pine wood smoke and a sweetness that only came with change. On the porch of the old cabin, Tom Harris sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, a mug of tea in his hand, and a sleeping golden retriever at his feet. Buddy no longer ran, but he still had his pride. His fur had thinned slightly, his eyes a touch cloudier, but there was a peace about him now, a deep, almost regal stillness that spoke of battles fought and survived. His tail still wagged for the people he loved, and his ears still perked at the sound of laughter. And on this morning there was plenty of it. Emily stepped out onto the porch with a clipboard in one hand and a red scarf wound messily around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the brisk air, her eyes brighter than they had been in years. "We've got 5 kids scheduled this afternoon," she said, scanning her notes. 2 with sensory disorders, 1 recovering from trauma, and 1 with a speech delay. Tom took a sip of tea. "You keep track of all that in your head." Emily smirked. "That's what the clipboard's for." The land that had once been just forest and memory had been slowly transformed over the last few months. With the help of Tom's firehouse crew, who had returned more than once to lend hands and hammers, they'd cleared space near the lake for a small therapy barn. The barn itself was modest, painted white with blue shutters and a wide sliding door that welcomed children veterans, and anyone needing the kind of healing hospitals couldn't offer. Inside were padded mats, beanbags, and shelves lined with books and toys. But the heart of the center was Buddy. He didn't need to perform. He didn't bark on command or fetch sticks. He simply existed, present, steady, warm. Children who hadn't spoken in weeks would curl beside him and whisper secrets into his fur. Adults who hadn't touched another living soul, since losing their loved ones, would rest their hands on his back and cry without shame. They called the center Buddy's place. It started as a temporary idea, a way to bring meaning to the time Tom had left, but it grew. People donated. Local news ran another segment. Volunteers came forward. People like Nora Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher with silver curls and hands that never stopped moving, and Marcus Lee, a quiet Vietnam vet who built birdhouses and smiled only when painting them with the kids. One afternoon, a boy named Daniel, age 10, brown curls nonverbal, came to the center with his mother, Olivia. Olivia was in her early 30s, tall and exhausted, with deep smile lines that hadn't been used in a while. She watched nervously as Daniel wandered the room, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Then he saw Buddy. He didn't approach right away. He sat near the wall watching Buddy, as if understanding the rules of this unspoken game didn't move either. An hour passed. Then Daniel crawled forward on hands and knees, stopped inches from Buddy's paws, and laid his head gently against the dog's chest. Olivia burst into tears. It became a moment they would talk about for months. It wasn't the first time Buddy had helped someone speak without words, but it reminded everyone, especially Emily, why they had started. Tom recovered slowly, but surely. He took his medication. He walked short distances. He told Emily stories he'd never shared before about the people he'd saved, the ones he'd lost. The nights he'd wondered if being a hero was enough to silence ghosts. Turns out, he said one day, watching Buddy lead a child around the barn with patient steps, the only thing that ever saved me was him. Emily touched his hand. He's saving all of us now. On a Sunday in October, the town gathered for an official ribbon-cutting ceremony. A small stage was built beneath the biggest oak tree on the property. Firehouse 21 showed up in uniform. Dr. Conway gave a speech. The mayor of Serene, Linda Paxton, a short, broad-shouldered woman with a commanding voice and a secret addiction to caramel apples, declared the land a place of community wellness. Buddy, wearing a new collar with a silver badge that read, "Therapy, Hero," slept through most of it. When the speeches ended, Tom stepped to the mic. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I've spent a lifetime walking into flames. Some you run through, some you carry, but the worst ones, they live inside you. This place isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about remembering you're not broken at all. You just need someone to sit beside you." He looked down at Buddy, and he's been sitting beside me since the start. That evening, after everyone had gone, Tom and Emily sat on the porch once more. The air had turned crisp, and somewhere in the woods a barn owl called softly. Buddy lay across their feet, contentful. "He's not going to live forever," Tom said quietly. Emily nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. "I know. But what he's built, what you've built—" Tom paused, watching the lights flicker on in the barn below. "That's going to last." Emily looked at him, and in her eyes there was no more grief, only gratitude. The leaves rustled. The stars blinked into existence one by one. And in that moment they didn't talk about endings. They talked about everything that had just begun. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come in flashes of light or thunder from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs with a steady heartbeat and eyes that say, "I will stay beside you no matter what." Buddy was not just a dog, he was a vessel of grace, a reminder that love can outlive pain, and that healing often comes quietly in the spaces between words. Through every storm and sorrow, God works in mysterious ways, and perhaps one of those ways is through the soft breath of a dog who refuses to let go, and the strength of a heart that chooses hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that miracles are real, and that God's love shows up in unexpected forms. Comment Amen if you believe in the power of loyalty, love, and second chances. Subscribe for more stories of hope, courage, and the quiet ways God moves through our lives. May He bless you and those you love today and always.